Welcome to this week's In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. I'm Eric Marsh, Executive Director of Whitewater Community Television, and glad you're able to join us for the first of what I hope will be a series of conversations with people in the community. We cannot ignore the protests that have been going on in our community recently. Those are not the first time. The issues of race, racism, social injustice, inequality have been a part of unrest in this country. Hopefully, we are reaching the point where the conversation continues, the dialogue continues, and we can move just beyond protests in the streets to actually doing something about the systemic racism that does exist in this country. I know some of you are already reaching for your remotes at this moment, and if that's the case, so be it. But many of us, people of color, have been getting phone calls, emails, text messages from friends, from acquaintances, from people that we know that we have worked with who say, I don't understand what's going on. I don't feel it. I see that there are some injustices. Can you help us understand? So I am reaching out to various community members to see if they can help in this dialogue. Here's what I think I can tell you up front in my most kind of nerd way. If you are a fan of Star Trek: The Next Generation, I think one of the things that you will find is we are not the Borg. We are not a collective of one mind who thinks or feels the same. We are human beings. We think, we feel, we follow people differently. So there is not one answer to the question, where do we go from here? What are you asking for? What do you want next? Because we all, depending on where we came from, how we were born, where we've lived, the experiences in our lives, what we think the next step should be will all be different. So you will be frustrated because there is not a single answer that is going to be given to you. Something else that you should know, whatever happens here will benefit you. I'm not the eternal optimist. So I'm going to say that if there is a change in the justice system, if there is a change in laws that make things better for people of color, everyone else is going to benefit because we are considered some of the lowest in society. And even if things get better, that's probably not going to completely change. So having said that, kind of prefaced it that way, I'm going to bring in my guest, Reverend Ron Chappell. I know him as a pastor of New Life Church of the Nazarene. I know him as a person who has been involved in the community in a number of ways, the NAACP, head of the Human Rights Commission. I know him as host of Proudly We Serve, a person who is a veteran and very proud of that. So Reverend Chappell, thank you very much for spending some time with me. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, my honor to be able to share with you in this discussion. Wherever we're going, whatever it's going to be, I'm just open to whatever I feel God wants me to do in this interaction. So here I am. Yeah.
For those who don't know you, and I like to remind people, no matter how much our population may be shrinking, it's not the same people here. You know, there are people moving in, there are people moving out. So for those who don't know you, give a little bit about your background that I may have missed, kind of fill in a little bit of the gaps there.
Well, I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in about 45. I know I don't look it, but anyway, that's a time for But as a young man, at about 14, I started getting into a little trouble. So my mom sent me off. They had divorced, and so my dad had moved to Michigan. So she sent me off to Detroit to live with him. And I got there, and at about 17, ninth grade, I decided I was going to drop out of school and join the United States Army. And at the time, the United States Army had a Project 5000 program where they would take 5,000 people who tested high in certain areas. Well, electronics was a hobby of mine. And so I scored high. And so they took me in and sent me to the signal school. And what did they do that for? All those big gadgets, man, I just went berserk, you know. So that's what I trained in initially. And that's what I did when I went to Vietnam. I provided telecommunications for our soldiers there back to D.C. and all that. Well, anyway, after my Vietnam stint, came back to the United States, was at Fort Hood, the electronic signal command there, and helped test equipment and all that. And then they sent me to Laos. I spent a year in Laos, came back to the United States. And when I got back, I was sent to Fort Raleigh, Kansas, and there I met a young man, Honor Bell, who is was a friend of Colin Powell. And Honor he just impressed me so much. He was really doing it. He was really making it, you know, and he had the respect of everybody, and that young black man. And he asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, man, I like this Army thing, man. He said, well, you can't do anything until you get your education. I said, what do I got to do? He said, go over to the Education Center and see what they got for you. So I went over to the Education Center and enrolled in courses to complete my high school education. So I was in that thing for almost a year, got my GED. And so I was good to go. So Honor came back. He said, well, what are you going to do now? I said, well, I'm ready to do whatever. He said, you're not done yet. He said, you got to go to college. I said, college? I said, I'm not smart enough to go to college. He said, yes, you are. He said, you get smart. You get in. He said, get that knowledge, man. He said, that's one thing people can't take away from you. They can't steal your knowledge. And so Honor was a big encouragement to me. And so he went with me to Kansas State University. He was getting ready to graduate and go to Officers Candidate School. But he dropped back and took an entry-level course with me, Introduction to COBOL and Fortran, computer languages. And you're too young to remember those. But I took those courses and I got an A. When I got that A, I was on my way, man. And to this day, he and I still remain friends. I mean, I can stay in contact with him. But anyway, Honor was a big encouragement to me for me to go ahead and pursue my education. And so it took me almost 18 years with all of my assignments to get my undergraduate work done, you know, but it is what it is, you know. During that time, the Army wanted to start or did start a race relations program. And when they started it, the commander came to me and he said, Sarge, he says, I want you to be my representative for our race relations program. He said, I look around and I see you got friends of all, you're interacting with everybody, you know. I said, well, that's just me, sir. You know? He said, well, I want you to be the rep. So he designated me as the rep. Well, my job was to talk with people and see where there were problems, all right, and bring them together and try to solve the problems. And so I was so good that the battalion stole me from my company commander and put me up at battalion. And so at battalion level, I had to interact with the division folks. It wasn't long before they were pulling me up to division. And they pulled me up there. And so now my battalion commander is angry, my company commander is angry, and I'm telling them, don't be mad at me, guys. Y'all started this thing, you know? So I got there, got through that division. And at division level, I'm interacting with all the higher level, higher echelon folk, you know, and civilian people who are involved, you know, running the installation of that. The Army started the Defense Institute, Defense Race Relations and Equal Opportunity Management Institute at Patrick Air Force Base, Florida. It was a master's level program. They sent me there. They, when I graduated from the course, they sent me to Europe. And my job was to go train and talk with troops, human relations, race relations, training and discussions and that facilitating. And I've been to so many places doing that kind of work. And so when I left and came back to Europe, back to the United States, I went to Selfridge Air National Guard Base in northern Michigan. It's northeast Michigan. And I was there for about 3 years, and then I retired. And then when I retired from the Army, I went to Wayne State University in Detroit, because I retired to Detroit, Michigan. Went to Wayne State and got entered into the master's program in social work. I was there about a year when things changed for me spiritually. And God began to draw on me, and I found myself doing Sunday school classes and all that. The next thing I know, I was in the Bible college.
It can happen that way.
Okay, I was in the Bible college, and so then I was in Detroit for a while, and then I went to Flint to start the church. I planted a church for the Church of the Nazarene in northern Flint, and then I was there for 9 years. And then I got a call from a fellow about this place called Richmond, Indiana. I said, Richmond, Indiana? He said, yeah. He says, I'm leaving. Charles Tillman, I don't know if you know him. He said, I'm leaving. He said, I want to just fill the pulpit while, until they get somebody in there. And so if you could come in, just do a weekend. I said, well, Charles, I got my own stuff to do here, I'm pretty busy, And he says, just one weekend, I said, I don't know, man. I said, I don't know. I'll think about it. So anyway, he said, okay. He said, well, call me because I got to get this filled. So I waited about 4 or 5 days, and I called him. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I'll come. And then here. And then when I got here, I
got involved in a number of different things. I'm going to backtrack for a second. You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. We're speaking with Ron Chappell. You mentioned being in the Army, being part of their team, being on race relations. How often were you the only person of color in the room working on race relations?
Well, in my office, actually, there was two of us. It was Honor and myself. Honor was part of the main team that I work with. So of an office of about 8 people, there was 2 of us. Then when we went out to the units, that number we were a significant minority. Probably in a group of 20 or 30, depending on where you went. If you went to the higher echelon sessions or units and all that, you found far less number of minorities. If you went to the infantry units, the armor units, then you found more minorities, which was consistent with a lot of the thought then that the Army was pigeonholing minorities into the, and I don't want to demean any of them because all of the jobs were important, but not allowing minorities to really exact their skills and abilities and all of that. I was blessed in that my scores were so high, thank the Lord, that they couldn't just kick me to the curb. They had to have me where I was,
That's part of the conversation that's being held out there, that this injustice is really kind of baked into the system across all levels of society.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
And the military is obviously not immune to that.
No, it's not. But I have to say this, that the military went a long way to breaking down, or was really open to breaking down some walls. Because over the course of time, we began to see more minorities And I have to attribute it to some of the work that me and others like me who were doing in the military, raising levels of consciousness and that. But a period of time, we start seeing minorities move into higher level positions, getting better promotions, getting promotions consistent with their qualifications and that, you know. And so they started moving into bigger, higher levels. So we started seeing more black generals and more black colonels, and more black, you know, and then senior non-coms, non-commissioned officers and that. So it was working. And so, quite frankly, Eric, when I got out of the military, I was amazed at how far behind the civilian community was. Remember, I went in as a 17-year-old kid, so I spent all my life, for adult life, growing up here in the military, 24 years. So when I got out, I said, man, but the military has went a long way towards breaking down walls. Or I don't know if you knew, but that 50, I believe it was, when integration in the military, when they just started filtering blacks out into the all-white units. Before, units were separated black and white. So the military really was the forerunner in the process of integration. And so the world, I believe, could have learned a lot from looking at the military's methodology in terms of making that happen, and learning to appreciate people for their individual talents and gifts, and that making the unit stronger. Yeah.
As you have spent your time here in Richmond, and look, I think you and I came here somewhere around the same time. I came here in 88. You came here in?
I got here in 95.
Okay, 95. Working with the Human Rights Commission, so you're in the city, you not only have your church, you get involved in Hope House. Talk about, from a racial standpoint, some of the things that you saw here that people walking through their day-to-day life might not have noticed, because you've talked about society being behind the Army, even in some ways, in what they do. This is a community that, to me, sounds like it has had a rich history with music. People talk to me about the teachers that were here. People talk to me about the gentlemen, the people of color that were in the fire department, on the police department. But you look around now, and those numbers are nowhere now what they were years past.
Right. Well, the Human Rights Commission piece, I can address that. After I'd been here about a year and a half, I got a call from Dennis Andrews. He had just gotten elected, and he wanted to talk to me about the Human Rights Commission. And I'm thinking, what does this man know about me? And so he had me come over, and I went over and I talked to him. He says, I'd like for you to take the commission. I said, well, sir, it's got to be other people in this community that know everybody. He said, I don't want somebody that from here, because, and he didn't like put people down. He just said, I don't want anybody that has a personal axe to grind. So I decided I would do it. And immediately when I got in there, I began to put the office together and that full functional commission. And it got to be pretty effective. In fact, I remember him coming in one day and he said, goodness gracious, I didn't know what I did. I said, well, you asked me to do this, okay? I said, are you with me or not? He said, do your job. So the commission, I thought, became a very valuable commission. Was effective in identifying a lot of the areas in the community. We did a community assessment, which made a lot of people angry, because we were asking questions about, the minority representation, the employment, positions in different businesses and that. Salaries. We've even found salary disparities between whites and minorities who are occupying the same type of jobs, And but my objective, my way of doing things was I didn't go in with the attitude of destroying somebody's business. I went in with the attitude of making the business better by helping that owner see where he or she was losing potential and by not allowing persons to use their skills and that they've garnered and things that they've been trained with down through the years, that they can be better use in the company, and so that's how I operated. Some saw me as being an intrusion. So with those folks, all I could do was just do my job, and so oftentimes it would cause me to have a conference with them and their attorneys and that. Even to the point of having to go to court with them to get some things corrected, So anyway, my time in this community, between the commission and other organizations that I've been affiliated with, I've been able to see where the great disparities between white and black in terms of positioning in organizations. We talk about political, economic, and social power, which is the elements of racism. Minorities, blacks here didn't have any of that. I mean, there were little microcosms of this, that, and other, but as far as widespread or a community-wide influence or power or whatever, it didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it, Eric, I found was because of fear. And what I mean by that is that when issues would come up, people were afraid to address them. And many were afraid to address them because, remember, they don't own any of the big businesses. And so they're afraid that they're going to get fired. They're afraid that something's going to happen to them. Mm-hmm. So they won't speak out. They won't say anything. I remember I had an issue that I brought before the city council on some discriminatory practices and on some organizations around the community. And I asked this group of blacks, people from the community, to come and be there. Just be there. Let them see your faces, your concern. I had maybe 3 or 4 people. I continued to push. They were talking about dismantling the commission, and they wanted to get rid of it because it had started becoming so effective. We had started dealing with folks and dealing with businesses. And so their buddies were calling them. These business people were calling these council members. And yeah, I'm telling on y'all. Their buddies were calling them and asking them, you got to do something about this fellow. In fact, one council member who I won't disclose came to me and said there was some very vulgar language directed at a city council member or city council members regarding getting rid of me because I was getting to be a pain in the butt, or words to that effect. I knew this stuff was going on, but I didn't worry about it, And when I'd come to commission meetings and they start talking about the budget, the council meeting, and they start talking about the budget of the Human Rights Commission, I said to them, wait a minute, we got the smallest budget of any department in the city. I said, the stuff that folks throw away would finance our department. And you're going to sit up here and talk about getting rid of us because you want to streamline the budget? I said, I know what the issues are. And here's what I said. I said, if the complexion of that council was different, we wouldn't even be talking about this today. And boy, oh boy.
Did you believe it when you said it?
Yes, I believed it. I believed it. I believed it. And one reason is this: if the complexion of the council had been different, we might not have even had to have the meeting to address the issues, because the council would have been representative of the community. I'm thinking, which would suggest that, because these were mostly business people, so. But I don't know, but
Started this conversation by saying in my introduction that people would be a little disappointed because there's a belief that we all follow a leader, that we all believe the same things. Mm-hmm. There is a conversation being held right now where the conversation surrounds defunding the police department. And depending on who you talk to, defunding is something different. Some people are saying, yeah, we need to look at a different policing model. Some people are saying we need to talk about where the funds in certain police departments need to go to help more with social issues than with militarizing the police. When you hear the conversation about defunding the police department, what do you hear, and why do you believe that is a cry out in the community? And is it a cry that you are a fan of?
I believe that is anarchical. Is that a word? Anarchical, or the cry, the thought, the philosophy of an anarchist who would want to defund, which would eventually actually mean the dismantling of the police department. When I was at the director of the commission, back in, 04, I think it was, when Sheikh was chief, 03, 04, back in there, he and I had this discussion about the lack of minority officers on the police department. I went to him, and in fact, he was the only chief that I've known of that ever had any facilitating discussions within the department about race relations. And he made it mandatory for his officers to come. Me and Ron Church, we did the training. But we went to Cincinnati, Ohio, and we contracted with a recruitment company that went out to all the major Black universities to recruit for us. He came back with a list of about 25 people. We were excited. We had planned a tour on a bus. We had MCL was lined up to feed them and all that. A few days before they were supposed to come, Eric, we get a phone call. Nobody was coming. So what's up? Cincinnati, Detroit, Chicago were paying upwards of $8,000 to $10,000 more a year in salary. And so they took those jobs. I said, well, if you'd given me an opportunity, I would have been able to tell them and show them where they could live well on the salary. We were paying mid-20s and at the time. I said, they could live pretty good, in Richmond, I said, plus I could show them where their possibility of retirement was greater here than in Chicago and Detroit. Yeah. But my point is, to take away money from the department would cripple it in terms of trying to do what it needs to do in terms of bringing in good qualified people into the police department. No, I don't agree with defunding the police department. I think that's crazy. I think it makes no sense at all. It's like it's taking a crutch off a crippled man.
So if we don't defund, if we don't retrain, how does this begin to change? Yeah. Because everybody, from me to you to Colin Powell, all have stories of being pulled over for the tail light that wasn't out, because an officer felt like we were driving a car better than we should be driving. I mean, whatever the answer.
Yeah, but I think the idea of retraining, getting into the minds of those people that we hire and pay to be the law enforcers in our community. I think we need to have some sort of oversight, monitoring thing. That's one of the things we're going to talk about in this group that's going to meet tomorrow. Having some sort of oversight committee. They have the merit board and all that, but I'm talking about a board that has a little bit more power than that, this oversight board, to look at issues where police are charged with excessive force and brutality. Okay, we can weed those kind of people out. We can weed them out, and in our process of hiring, we need to come up with maybe better ways of assessing where a person is mentally, because it is a mental issue. Racism, it's a mental issue. We need to be able to assess that and just make sure that we try as much as we can to hire the right people. When we have issues, to be direct and addressing the issue. Don't try to hide and protect. Deal with it. No, we need the money. We need the money. Because there's other jobs out there they can get that are paying, fairly decent salaries. So we got to be, competitive in terms of what we offer to people to protect us. Yeah. But
you talked about your friend in the military who was your mentor. You've had people in the education world who were your mentors.
Yes.
And you look around the schools here in Richmond, Wayne County, elementary, high school, and look at the lack of teachers, administrators of color. How do you see that issue as a person who didn't necessarily start off understanding the importance of education in your life, and understanding the importance of having a mentor who maybe looked like you and talked like you and took you through things? How do we help our educational community understand the need? Because there's a lack right now as you look into there.
Well, there's got to be input from the community. We need to attend the board meetings and that and express our desires to have more minority representation in our school system. If they don't hear from you, and it doesn't mean that they don't know, because I think they all know, but if they're not nudged, then sometimes we don't get action. So the community needs to be present and attend board meetings. Same concept I had when I was trying to talk to city council and all that. If people need to be there to express their desire so that the council, the board will know that these people mean business. And if I plan on being a board member for any length of time, I better get on it and do something. Plus the fact that it's the right thing to do. Minority children need to see people in positions to encourage them to want to be in position. They need to be able to see that. Just like what happened to me. It was a black man who had opportunity through some influential people that he knew that encouraged him. And so he passed that on, for his God. And so, and I try to do much the same thing. We need to encourage our school board. We need to be there and let them know that we are concerned about the lack of educators that look like us in the system. We need to say that and be straight up front with it, and don't be suggestive or implying, but say it. We want more black teachers. We want more black educators in our system. The Hispanic communities, similarly, need to speak up. Yeah.
They're not going to be able to pay the kind of money that Chicago can pay, New York can pay, LA can pay. We ran into the same thing with the police officers that you were just talking about. How does a community like this overcome that? Because, and I asked you something earlier, how many times were you the only or one of the few in the room? We know that some people are able to deal with that better than others, where they're one of only a couple in the room as opposed to being even half and half. but walking into a situation here where superintendent down, almost anybody in the administration building does not look like them, does not have any of the experiences of them. How do we face that? How do we handle that? How do we talk about that and get those empowered to understand that who they introduce to these people that they bring in also makes a difference?
Right.
I'm bringing the superintendent and the assistant superintendent and a couple of building principals with me. Okay, so you got 4 on 1 at that point.
Right. We need to get people to understand that, again, that they need to be a part of what's going on if they want to see change. I personally don't feel uncomfortable in a room full of people who are not like me. And that's because I feel good about me. And I don't think that just because they're white that they're any better than me. I think we are equal. We are equal. And so I don't sit there thinking, well, these white folks, they're going to be hating on me. And no. I look around the room and I see, people, and I say, this is a person. This is whatever profession they are who they are, and I'm just as good as they are. So I just don't feel that, I don't know, intimidation, fear, or a less than thing. I just don't feel that thing, man. I don't think I could have done the things that I have done had I had that type of mindset. I don't think. So when a person comes to me with what they want to show me as representation from a particular organization, and they've got 2 or 3 people on their arms and talking to me about what they want to do in their organization, that doesn't necessarily impress me. Well, what I want to see is, what are you doing before you come to me? You go over here and you go over here and you get this person, you get that person, then you come to me. What's happening on a larger scale? What's really going on? If I go to your corporation and I go to 10 departments, how many minorities am I going to see? If I see 1 or 2, that don't say anything to me. If I see adequate representation in those areas, and now I have to give a pass in some areas, because, for example, in this community,
mm-hmm.
I've had genuinely concerned employers come to me and say, Professor Ron, I don't get any black people applying. They don't come. I said, well, what are you doing to encourage them to come? Because they may not come because maybe unfortunately back in the history of this company or whatever, minorities might not have been treated very well. And they hear those stories from grandma, granddad, and mom, and they don't want to subject themselves to that, so they stay away from there. Now you're there now. You're the grandson or whatever, grandson of that person. Your attitude is different. You really want to make changes. So how do you make that happen? I think you need to personally avail yourself to people and share with them what you want. Go to meetings where Black people tend to attend and congregate. There was a gentleman at the NAACP meeting the other night talking about this very thing, about how do we get more minorities into our business environment. Tom Williams, as you know, used to be the HR at Reed Health. He's now the president of the NAACP. And he was saying that that was an area where they had a lot of difficulty in terms of trying to recruit minorities from this area. Another side of this, and it's ugly, man. It's ugly. I hate to even talk about it, but it's true. And that is, too many of our young Black men in particular find themselves caught up in the drug problem, doing illegitimate things that cause them to be overrepresented in our penal system. And so that's a problem. But it's connected to the major problem, because if people don't see themselves as having opportunity, then they're going to regress to whatever things that they can to make a buck.
But somebody can say they can see themselves with opportunity. They had Barack Obama as president.
Okay, oh, Lord have mercy. See, you bad boy. Let me say this on record.
Tell me you haven't heard it.
Yeah,
you haven't heard it.
Well, I've said it that, no, what I've said is the condition and the state of Black people in this country did not improve because Barack Obama was president. Our statistics continued to go up. I mean, the shootings in the Black community in these major municipalities, we're talking about this white cop putting his neck on George Floyd, and people were talking about white police officers killing Black people. Well, yeah, we got some white police officers who need to be called into check and need to be prosecuted. But if you look at the overall numbers of Black people being shot, Eric, it's Black people shooting Black people. I'm sorry, but that's exactly what it is, man. If you go to Indianapolis, well, in fact, when I watch, other than watching WCTV, I watch Channel 13. Boy, did I pull it.
I'm glad you threw that one in there.
But in the mornings, I tell my wife, I said, man, when are we going to wake up in the morning where we're not hearing about this? When? So that makes it add some complexity to the problem,
And no one is suggesting that it is a purely one-sided problem, but right. Some of the problems of which you speak, it is said, are created by the systemic racism and oppression that people have gone through. Mm-hmm. We're talking for centuries now. I mean,
yes,
this is a multi-decades old problem.
Yes.
Where someone has said, okay, there's affirmative action. And then 5 years later, people said, okay, that 5 years has undone that past 150 years. We need to all just go back to a level playing field because now all things are equal.
Well, I was in on the birth of affirmative actions. In fact, again, the military was the testing bed, if you will, of affirmative actions. And initially, it seemed like a good program, that it was mandatory that you had to have a percentage of your leadership, your workforce, whatever, had to be reflective of the community in which they serve. So if minorities were 30% of the community, it had to be 30% of the employment, 30% of the leadership. What that did, though, is it compelled businesses to go out and just grab people and pull them in, whether they were qualified or not. And so you'd find this guy sitting at a desk, he couldn't add, but he had on a 3-piece suit, and so that was their representation, if you will. So affirmative actions really got to be the chagrin of many businesses, well, the Army and many businesses, as it, became more of a forced requirement on the businesses. And so people began to do all kinds of crazy stuff to manipulate that system. Affirmative actions in its initial concept was good, I thought, but in application, it turned out to be a serious problem, and I don't think it really did us a lot of good by forcing that hand. I think a better way would have been to, again, train up the minds of the leaders in that and help them to see where it's to their benefit to have X number of whatever group, Black, Hispanic, whatever, in their employ and in their leadership, to make the people feel that they're really a part of this organization or this company. And I think that can happen. I've seen it happen. I've seen businesses change because the mindset of that business owner changed. I've seen the employees even feel better about themselves and about their possibilities of progress in the company, because the mindset of the business person changed, and the bottom line, that dollar bill, began to increase, because when people feel good, they work hard. When they feel good and they feel like they're part of something, they really begin to apply themselves. And they bring also with them sometimes new ideas that can be incorporated in whatever this business is doing that would add to the bottom line of the company. When we're allowing people to function based on what they know and their knowledge and their abilities. So back to the affirmative action thing. Initially I thought it was good, but as it played out, I became an opponent to it and thought there was a better way, and I've seen that there's a better way to help businesses to increase their minority representation and utilize them put them in positions commensurate with their skills and abilities in education, et cetera. Yeah.
How do you see things moving forward here in Richmond? You've been a part of at least one group discussion. I know you've been part of multiple group discussions. I know you were in dialogue with the Chamber of Commerce Issues and Advocacy Committee, along with Tom Williams and Bill Harris. I know that you were sitting in on a meeting with the mayor and the police chief and the sheriff and some others. Talk about how you see Richmond in terms of Richmond-Wayne County, in terms of race, and where some movement might be able to take place. Okay,
now where are we now? I've thought about what's happening nationally and that, and what can we do in our community to be proactive and to address the problems we have. And I wasn't sure which way to move, but I got a call from a young man, Joseph Seeger, who is a new pastor at Central United Methodist Church. And he said to me, Pastor Brother Ron, he says, with all this stuff going on, what can we do? He says, I don't know what I can do. He says, I don't know anybody. He says, but he says, I know you know everybody. And I'm thinking, how do you know I know everybody? What makes you think that? I know a lot of people, but I don't know everybody, But so we joked about that piece. Anyway, we talked about it, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, Joseph. I said, let me make a few calls, and then I'll get back to you, okay? He said, all right. So I said, well, to myself, okay, I'm going to call the police chief. I'm going to call the sheriff. I'm going to call the mayor and see if they have an interest in talking about this stuff. So anyway, I called them and a few other pastors, and to a person, everyone right away agreed that we needed to get together and talk about it. But the chief, the sheriff, the mayor, several pastors and that came, and we were out at Glen Miller Park at shelter number 10. And as folks came in, we greeted each other. And so standing there, and I said, listen, I said, if there's anybody that does not think that racism is a problem in this community, we need to just go home, forget about it. And to a person, everybody stayed, nobody left. And so we began to dialogue about these different areas, the police department, sheriff's department, the city government, the community at large, that there is a problem. And thank God, the good part about this is that almost all these guys, the sheriff is relatively new, the police chief is new, the mayor, he's on the second round, but he's still new.
He's young enough to be new.
Yeah, young enough to be new. And so these guys come with a totally different mindset, I believe, with a genuine desire to see some change in our city. And I mean, we got to talking about the whole idea of systemic racism, institutional racism, personal racism. You know, we got to, and how those things played out in our various areas. And that there was definitely a need. And that if we didn't do something, that the people, ultimately by what's going on nationally, we're going to see some things explode here in Richmond. And this was before the first march. So we're trying to be proactive now. This is the mindset. And so we said that we would go back to our areas, think of some things that we can do. In the meantime, I was tasked to put together this next meeting with people from different areas and organizations to come together and talk about the city at large and the county at large. What are the problem areas that need to be addressed? What are the indicators that we have operative institutional racism in our communities, and make some plans about addressing those areas. So I put that together.
We're just about out of time. You're watching In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11, spending this time with Ron Chappell. As a person who has seen this in a number of different arenas, the military, from the religious side, from the social side, what would be your ask? What would be your response to being able to move this needle? We're trying to move toward a more just society, as it were, just for everyone. And for different people, that will mean, as I said at the very beginning of this, different things, depending on how you grew up, where you grew up, what you've seen, what your life has been like. Your ask is going to be something different. If you're in the inner city of Indianapolis or Flint or Detroit, as opposed to growing up in rural America, your thoughts, your ask is going to be different. You've seen it from a lot of different places. What for you personally are a couple of steps that need to be taken so that we are beginning to end this conversation? We're at the beginning of it now.
Oh, yeah.
Again. How do we keep the conversation going? One, beyond the November election, which is going to be another election, an election like no other in some ways. It's going to be divisive. It's going to take those people who have linked arms and are singing Kumbaya at this moment, and it's going to tear them apart because they're going to remember that they're one issue voters and this ain't that issue.
That's right.
How do we keep this going? How do we move things along? And what would be your ask? What would you like to see happen next?
Well, I like, for one, for people to be honest. Be honest with yourself. If you have an issue of racism in you, or you see this quality of race, your race being superior to other races, and you may not be thinking about it like that, but in the way that you act and engage with this other group, it'll tell you, you know what you feel. If that's true, then you need to deal with yourself, because you can't do anything until you deal with yourself. You can't go out here and help correct anything until you deal with yourself. And then if that's true, then do something. Call somebody. It don't have to be me, but call somebody and share with them, somebody that you can share with. You know that they're going to put it on Facebook, all right, and share with them. The other thing is, if you see something wrong, don't just turn your head. Report it. Talk to whoever's in charge and let them know that this is wrong. The jokes in the break room, the in jokes, and all those different ethnic jokes that are skirting around the company. That's telling you the attitude of the people that you're working with. Don't let that just pass. Say something to somebody. Do something. Be involved with your community. Attend board meetings. Be a part of organizations that are trying to make change. Make yourself available to be used in your community if you really want change. You can't just sit back and talk about it. And too many people are sitting back on their couches and their easy chairs and say, oh, well, we got a problem in Richmond. We're going, hey, get up and do something. And even if you can't get out, and I tell the elder people in my church, you might not be able to get out, but you know what? You can use that phone and you can pray. Everybody can do something. There's not a person that if you genuinely want change, can do something. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but and there's so much more. And I know you ain't got all this a whole bunch of time.
There is. This is, as I said, the beginning of the conversation again. It will continue. We will have you back. We will have some other pastors back. There are different ways to talk about this. There are different groups, different segments where the conversation can be held, where people can figure out where they are and then begin to figure out where they want to be. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing. But I keep hearing that there is a lot of people who are just listening right now. So I wanted to give them a chance to hear at least one side. Yours won't be the only one. Yours won't be the last one. But hopefully the dialogue will continue. And my hope is that almost what you said, when you talked about businesses seeing things getting better for them when they allowed people to grow and expand and hire a more diverse workforce. You know, one of my hopes is that, you know, we live in a capitalist society where green is supposed to be the driving color. Right. If that becomes the driving color, you'll find out there's a lot of money on this side that maybe is being lost because you're profiling people when they walk through the door of your building, or you're calling police on them when you don't need to be, or you're not speaking up about things. So it's part of it.
Clutch your first when I walk by.
There you go. All of it. Ron Chappell, I greatly appreciate the time. Thanks for being on this week's In Focus.
Anytime.
Thank you for joining me. We'll be back again next Thursday for another edition of In Focus on Whitewater Community Television's WGTV Channel 11. As always, I wish you well.